Hello, I'm Bret Moss, and you're watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. Our guest today is Reverend Keith Russell Lee. Reverend Lee is the accomplished pastor of Destiny Church, which is located in the suburbs of Chicago. Keith is also an entrepreneur. His book, Power, Faith, and Living, offers a spiritual guide for creating an extraordinary life. He's currently working on a PhD from Trinity Theological Seminary in Indiana. Keith is married, and he's the proud father of 3 children. Reverend Keith Russell Lee, welcome back to The Defining Moment. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you back here to our studio today.
Thank you so much, Bret.
It's great to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here today, too.
Thanks for coming. Our topic today is embracing our true spiritual nature. And I'd like to get us started by asking you to share a defining moment from your own life which allowed you to reinvent your own view of yourself.
Wow. In the previous program, and I will just kind of share, of course, me really understanding my oneness with God was, of course, the overall defining moment. I think that once I began to understand who I was in God, it then just opened up the vistas and the doors and the horizons. However, you know, there's a lot of stuff that still has to die, you know. And one of those things that had to die was this false image of who I thought I was. Which was probably the most defining moment of my life, because one of my teachers shared with me that I had a problem, and the thing was that about the way I was defining myself. Over the years, I really had sought to be the best at whatever I could do. I read many books, probably 5 to 6 books per week. And it was like always doing things. And he says, like, what do you have to prove? What are you trying to prove? And I realized something, that what I was trying to prove was that I was just as intelligent as anyone, just as smart as anybody, and that I was good as anybody. And the reality of the fact is, all of that had come from my indoctrination, so to speak, and my being raised as an African-American male in America. And so he asked me the question. He says, well, who are you? I says, I'm an African-American black male. I'm an African-American male. That's who I am. And he says, Keith, that's not who you are. And he says, and that has been driving your whole life. And I'm like, how dare you, brother, come telling me that's not who I am? Because that's who I am. I know. I look at my skin. This is who I am. He says, no, there's something greater. He says, let me ask you, what was Martin Luther King? I says, he was a black man, a great black man. He says, no, Martin Luther King was a man who happened to be black. I says, well, now, come on now. You're coming up with some of this gobbledygook teaching, stuff. Psychobabble stuff. What are you saying? He was a great black man, and I'm proud to say I'm a proud black man. I'm proud that he was a proud black man. I'm getting kind of irate at that time, Bret.
Yeah.
And he says, no. He says, Martin Luther King could not have done what he did if he thought as a black man in 1955 when he led the bus boycott. Because his thinking would have been limited to what only black men could do in his time.
Yes.
He says that he dare suggested that Martin Luther King was a man who acted out God's purpose and plan in his life. And he says that if you really want to be free, you need to rethink this African American piece. Now, again, I was born in the civil rights era. I remember separate bathrooms, black and white. I was part of the whole integration movement through my early years in school. My high school had race riots. Now, that was something very near and dear to me, and I get kind of choked up even talking about that now. And I had to release this whole notion and idea, but something went off in my mind. Something went off in my soul and my heart, and I get excited when I think about that today, was that I am a man. I am, beyond that, a spiritual being. And the spirit that's within me transcends any of the stuff of this world.
The labels.
The labels that society and the world places upon you that limits you. Because what was happening to me in my life, again, everything was going well, but still I was always having to prove myself and live up to some other sense of standard, because I thought that was expected of me instead of me being truly who I am. And man, you talk about liberating. You talk about for the first time where I was able to really just be me. And then again, to really embrace that oneness with God was a powerful thing. And I think then from that standpoint, my life has taken upon a whole nother level because I had limited myself in so many things. Oh, white people will not come to my church. White people will not do this. Latino, I had all of these things. Or if white people accepted me, I've got to be the PhD. If white people accept, I've got to be just as smart. I've got to make all these references. Not just accepting me for who I am and then understanding. But when I then came to this understanding that I'm a spiritual being, made and created in the likeness and the image of God. Talk about defining moment. Life then takes off. Now, mind you, I share this with it whenever you have new awakenings. People got offended. How dare you say you're not a black man? I don't understand this. Look at you. You'll find out how society is going to teach you. No, I'm a spiritual being having a spiritual experience. I transcend all of the other limiting things and limitations in terms of life. So that was my defining moment.
Wow, that's very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Really, really moving. Thank you. How did you go about rediscovering your relationship with God?
I was looking at God through a very limited lens. Wow, I was looking at it through an African American theology. Not to say that anybody else's theology is right, but then I began to look at through this idea of oneness in relationship with God. God, it's me and you. It's not me as a black man. It's not me as, and I do understand culture. I do understand how culture, plays a part in a role. I've taken anthropology. I've studied theology enough to be able to understand that, and I have respect for that. But we've got to understand, which I came to understand, was that I'm greater than that, and I'm more than those cultural things. And so I began saying, man, it's me and God, and it's like God and me. It's like, and he operates and he lives inside of me for years. You think about this. People go to church Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and we are taught about the Holy Spirit living and dwelling inside of us. But yet we go to church and all we hear is, in many traditions. I grew up in, and I'm not going to share the denomination, but I grew up in a very conservative denomination. And all I heard growing up was that all of my righteousness of that was of filthy rags. All I heard was that I'm a poor, lowly sinner. All I heard was that even when God blesses me, I am so unworthy of that. And all of that was like, weighing upon me. In addition to that, I'm black. You talk about, ready to jump off of a bridge, right? But yet from the standpoint of that, when I began to then understand this concept of oneness that I have with the Father, that I talk about in 14 Principles of Power, Faith, and Living, when I began to understand that he created me and made me in his likeness and in his image, and that all of my that my righteousness is his righteousness. Man, it just, again, opened up vistas and horizons, and it deepened my relationship with God, a God who loved me so much, that invested so much in me, that I have this relationship of oneness. I talk about this from the standpoint of the epiphany that I had as far as God. And that was when I looked up into the sky in Jamaica and I saw all of the stars, and I felt this connectedness that, man, the God who made all of this made me also, kind of reminiscent of that 8th Psalm. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth. When I consider the stars and the sun and the moon that you have made, what is man that thou considereth him? And I thought, man, yes, God made all this vast universe, and in addition to that, he created and made me in his likeness and his image. Oh man, life takes upon a whole nother meaning and a deeper meaning, and particularly then understanding then he made me in his likeness and image, so I'm not bound by the limitations of this world, but I'm a spiritual being having a spiritual experience.
Okay, thank you so much. How does a disempowering view of self affect a person's life?
Well, disempowering view of self impacts our life in this way. Much like what I talked about. I always felt like I had something to prove. Can you imagine living life with something to prove. Everybody that you meet, I've got to prove myself. I got to show you that I'm smart. I got to show you that I'm bright. I got to show you that I'm good enough. I got to show you in terms of that. I mean, imagine living in that kind of hell.
And isn't that just one example of a disempowering view?
Yes.
Aren't there many varieties?
Oh yeah, there's many varieties that fall along in certain categories. But no matter what, can you imagine people living in that kind of hell? As far as that's concerned? And what does that do? That impacts relationships. That impacts the way that I am in relationships with my children. It impacts the way that I'm in a relationship in terms of spouse. Listen, I know what it's like to have a bad marriage. I know what it's like to have a divorce. And it impacts every aspect of our lives because we're operating from a perspective of a false sense of who we are. This is the way that I've got to be because I'm a black man. This is the way I've got to be because I'm a white woman. This is the way I got to be because I'm a Latino man, whatever the situation is. This is the way society says that I have to respond. This is the way society says that I have to be. This is what the culture is doing. And so people, we have allowed ourselves to create these little hells for ourselves. I believe that's one of the reasons of all the societal ills that we have within our society as well. Because of the standpoint of if you don't know who you are, firstly, let me say, if you don't know God, then secondly, if you don't know who you are and have a healthy understanding of who you are, then why would we dare think that everything, be it from family to society, would be any different? Because we have no clue of who we are, and we have no clue of the greatness that is within us. And so, it becomes whatever then society says the role by which we should play.
And it kind of tends to go to the lowest common denominator, right?
Absolutely.
The standard of what is the purpose of life kind of tends to go to the lowest common denominator, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's amazing because, again, one of the things that during this time frame that 5 years ago when I was really going through, I started looking at some of the narratives in terms of what does the Bible really say about who I am. And it's amazing because the Bible is such an empowering book. It tells us about all of these wonderful things. We've been Genesis, we've been created and made in His likeness and in His image. God created both male and female. He created both them. No male dominance over female. He created both them. And then and the psalmist declares we've been fearfully, that word fearful in Hebrew, reverently, and wonderfully made by God. Wow, God made us with reverence. It goes on, and on. Deuteronomy says God has made us, and the covenant that He made with the children of Israel, which is He made us to be the head and not the tail, to be above only and not beneath. Man, when I started really looking at those narratives and grabbing those things that before years I heard, but yet I never really looked at them and said, that's who I am. That opened up a far more powerful way of being than the former aspects of me not knowing again who I am. And when I became informed by those types of narratives within Scripture.
Okay, thank you so much. What's involved in effectively embracing our true spiritual nature?
Well, necessarily in embracing our true spiritual nature is that, first of all, that we've got to understand that who we are is not who we are. And that's what I tell people all the time. Who you think you are is not who you are. The reality of the fact is that we are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience. When we, first of all, embrace that there is more to me and that this is who I am, be it my education, my curriculum vitae, my resume, and if I don't have all the letters, that which I've made because I work on this job, I do this profession, I live in this neighborhood, I do this and I do that. The reality of the fact is this, that all of those things are really great and fine, but that's not who you are. That's just simply the ego dressed up. Because who we truly are is spirit. Aristotle, the great father of Western philosophy, he says that man is made up of mind, body, and spirit. And the core of our being, the core of our existence is spiritual. So I've got to, first of all, recognize that I am a spiritual being. I've got to embrace that notion and fact. Then, as we move to how we are able to demonstrate that and to be that, is then we've got to be able to then, I like to say, get informed by the Scriptures. society will throw all kind of things at life, throws all kind of things at us.
Yes.
And it's to make us forget who we truly are.
Uh-huh.
And so it's easy to be, to rely upon my strength as a corporate VP. It's easy to rely upon my strength as, well, hey, I am a, big star, and, I have all these resources available, so forth and so on. But yet, we have to be able to say, that's the ego. Let me deny that. And what then the next stage is not only being informed by the scriptures, is then we've got to continue to reprogram ourselves. That word is sometimes very controversial when I say that, but then we've got to, we've been programmed all of our lives to be what we are.
Okay.
To affirm the ego, to affirm that which we think that we are.
The materialistic side.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So now we have to be affirmed in terms of this new awakening of who we are as a spiritual being. Mm-hmm. Of course, informed by the scriptures. Well, then how do we do that? I tell people all the time, you've got to saturate yourself in the teachings, in everything that you can possibly get your hands on to be able to build up your level of faith and consciousness to get to the level where you're walking in that effortlessly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. How can a person develop an empowering view of self?
When we begin to walk in terms of truly understanding who we are, and this is what I had in my life, I realized that I could not hang around the same people that I hung around with. And
that's difficult to face, right?
That is very difficult to face. People that you love, people that you care about. Now, I did not just say, oh, get out of here, get out of my life, because now I understand who I am. I simply said, you know what, I've got to develop some parameters. This is now my understanding of God. This is now who I am. And this is the way that I am choosing to live my life. Now, what I did with them was that I enlisted them in the possibility for their life from the standpoint of sharing what I share with them, that could be a possibility for them to also develop a greater relationship with God, and also for them to be able to have a greater understanding of themselves.
And I'm sure people responded in different ways, obviously.
But yet, I still have them as friends, but what I did was that this is the parameter that now I'm setting.
Yeah.
And we'll be fine, we'll be happy. I'll still come out to the cookouts. I'll still be able to, to hang out on the veranda and have the iced tea. However, I am serious about that, because a lot of times people become very negative and skeptical of the things that you're doing in your life, as if they have an opinion for your life. But I believe a lot of times people are skeptical and opinionated about the things that you're doing positively in their life, is because when you begin to grow and developing your life, as you begin to have a greater understanding of yourself, it puts a lot of pressure on them.
It's a challenge for people to have to face the limitations of their own life, and how they're living their own life.
Absolutely. And it becomes a mirror for them, like, oh God, before I could ignore that, or misery loves company, so we could all commiserate on all of our issues. But now someone's breaking away from the herd. It's like, Plato's allegory of the cave, where, we're all chained in the back of the cave, looking at life through these shadows that are being flashed on the wall, and thinking that that's what's really life, what life's about. But man, someone has the nerve to break away, to break those shackles, and to be able to view life in a different way. That's scary for many people, and many people can't handle that. Yeah. That's why then people are attacked.
Very clear. Thank you. What impact does an empowered view of self have on the family?
And I'm glad you asked that question, because it has a tremendous impact upon a family. When a person begins to understand who they are, because see, one thing that I failed to say, because see, what all of that does is start to begin to drive you toward understanding purpose. And I define purpose as God's original intention for your life, or the universe's or God's intention for your life. And so as I begin to know who I am as a spiritual being, I have to know that life is not about living 75, 80, 90 years, and so I can have a yacht on the Pacific, or I can drive my Maserati, or I could be able to have, all those things are nice. Trust me, they're really nice. But life is more than that. And when you understand that you're a spiritual being, having a spiritual experience, that begins to drive you then, okay, if I'm spirit, made and created in the likeness and the image of God, I have to fulfill a purpose for God and what that's about. Now, how does that impact the family? Because then we begin to understand our family also has a purpose. Family's not together because guess what? Boy, I found a beautiful woman and God, she's so adorable and I want to marry her because, we'll make great looking babies. Or as, a woman sees a man and says, oh gosh, look at him. He's just a hunk. He's 6'4", tall, dark, and handsome. The reason why people are married is for purpose. The reason why God brings people together is for a purpose. And when we understand that we're spiritual beings having a spiritual experience, and then when we begin to come together and understand family is for a purpose, then the offspring of that marriage begins to walk into purpose. That family then begins to make a difference within the society in which they live. The reality of the fact is that the reason why things are the way they are in the world is not because the church. People will complain, oh, if churches would only do. People say, oh, if, the government would only do. Listen, does it really matter, Republican or Democrat? I dare say no. I know that's controversial, but I dare say no. Look at the Congress after it changed over. We still have war. But the reality of the fact is that it's not the government's responsibility. The government does have responsibility. Mm-hmm. But the family and when we change, when families begin, the change that we seek, quoting Mahatma Gandhi, the change that we seek, we must first become. I must first begin to materialize that within my family and within my home. Matter of fact, Paul wrote Timothy and said, if you want to be a pastor, guess what? It starts at home. And for those that govern their homes well, they can govern the church well. And so that's a hard word, but when our homes are aligned, when our homes understand purpose, when we get a healthy understanding of ourselves, and it's not this, I'm two halves making a whole, but we understand that both are complete and whole. Both are coming together as one. Two wholes are coming together as one to be able to fulfill the purposes of God. Man, the family then makes the tremendous difference, and I believe the difference that God had intended for the family to make within society and the world.
Okay, can you explain for us what is the purpose of the family?
I think ultimately, within everything in terms of life, is to manifest God. When you say purpose, there are books, you got 40 days and 60 days and all this to be able to find purpose and all that. And I say, no, you don't. All you need is 2 seconds to know the ultimate purpose of God is this, that God seeks to manifest himself in us and through us, even as us. We are at best no more than vessels to be used by God. We are just simply, receptacles that God pours his Spirit in for us to be able to demonstrate. So in a very real sense, purpose is simply that. It is just us here to manifest God. Now, I believe that each family has a different purpose, mm-hmm. because as
unique purposes,
exactly, and so different talents, different gifts, different abilities. Just as snowflakes are different and unique, different families are all different and unique. But yet, and I believe that's where the family has to, grapple with to be able to come and surrender, to be able to understand then what is our purpose, what does God have for us to do.
Each family has to discover that for themselves.
Yes.
If all Christians across America were to embrace their true spiritual nature, what impact would that have on Christianity in America?
Oh, wow. That would truly be an exciting event. I really believe, you're talking about the second coming, so to speak, proportions as far as that is concerned. Because we would really be making a tremendous impact and difference within terms of society. In the Christian context, oftentimes in traditional and even non-traditional circles, talk about, the kingdom. It really becomes then the kingdom being manifested, the presence of God being manifested here on this earth and people being ministered to. I believe peace would be achieved, as peace is possible. Because as I shared, I believe on the previous episode, that we've got to be the change that we seek. And when we allow ourselves to be changed as relates to peace, and we become peaceful in our relationships of life, then guess what? Life then reflects who we are. So that would be a very powerful thing, which would be unprecedented within terms of course, human history, as far as that is concerned, because even within the great laboratory of the United States, and this great experiment of democracy, and many religious groups coming to the country, Protestants coming to this great nation, they came and they brought their various views and their various sects and doctrines and dogma, and that they never could seem to get quite together as far as those things. And it becomes this, though, the standpoint that I believe that it's going to have to come to a point when we really just come along and says, what would Jesus do? A few years ago, I was really challenged when I was going through my epiphany, that I began to just teach upon the teachings of Jesus. I says, let me find, ultimately, what did Jesus teach and what did he believe? And I went straight to the Sermon on the Mount, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, 6, and 7. And I just literally preached and taught that this is what the essence of Jesus' teachings were. And I believe that if we would focus upon the essence of what Christianity is, that is possible. And it would be a tremendous thing without all the denominationalisms and the doctrines and so forth.
Okay. Well, Reverend Keith Russell Lee, on that note, I want to thank you so much for having been our guest again here on The Defining Moment. It's really been a pleasure for me to have you here.
Thank you so much, Bret.
Thanks for coming. You've been watching The Defining Moment for Creating the Culture of Conscience. You can find us on the internet at www.definingmoment.tv. Thanks for watching and have a great day.